happening, guys? We are bouncing around AES. I am here with Miss Heather Rafter of Rafter Marsh, Mr. Stanley Jordan, and James Allington of Princeton University. I have 3 Princeton alums. My St. Lawrence University degree is just, it ain't working with this group.
Stanley and I went to Princeton together, and he was everything in terms of, after studying really hard, he was the one who was performing and keeping us all sane. The whole campus was rallied around going to hear Stanley Jordan as much as we could on campus at Princeton. And besides being a tremendous musician, he's also a brilliant scholar. And what was your major, physics?
I majored in music, and I also took some related computer curricula. I actually was there during the early days of what they call computer music, which is a term that's not as often used today as it used to be. But back in those days, this was before MIDI. And if you wanted to make electronic music, you did it on some kind of analog synthesizer, or the cutting edge thing was making music strictly on a computer. And there are only a few places where you could even do that. There was Princeton, there was Stanford, I think San Diego, MIT. Let's see, I'm already starting to run. I mean, this was cutting edge stuff. And it was one of the reasons in particular that Princeton was attractive to me, was to get into the computer music scene. In those days, the system at Princeton didn't have a keyboard attached to it. It was all done with programming. So you really had to be deep into the geek zone to use it. The cool thing about it, though, was that for the first time in human history, we had an instrument that could make any possible sound. Because as long as you could describe that sound mathematically, you could generate it. And so from the composer's point of view, I felt like I was really on the cutting edge of something wonderful.
Did you find, though, that the technology sometimes could get in the way of just being able to create music?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it took a lot of time, and so in one respect, one could say that it was a distraction if you only have so many hours in a day. But on the other hand, I enjoyed working with the technology. I enjoyed developing the technology. That was part of the creativity, part of the creative process. Because one of the things that was great about working with the computer as an instrument is not only could you use it to create new sounds, but you could also use it to create new interfaces and new ways of representing music and new ways of thinking about music. So it was actually sort of a tool of thought. So I enjoyed being on that side of it as well.
That's very cool. Do you think we've caught up to where you sort of wanted this to be back in '81, or are you still like, oh my God, we still can't do X, Y, and Z?
We absolutely have caught up to that. To give you one example, back in those days, one of the things that I introduced into the computer music system was the use of a mathematical programming language called APL. So we had APL at Princeton, but nobody was using it for music. And so that was something that I brought into the picture. And the language has continued to be developed. It's an amazing language today in terms of where it's come, but a lot of people don't know about it. It's still considered one of the best kept secrets in the programming world. And one of the things that kind of got in the way is that it was so advanced that it was considered difficult to run. You know, we had it running on the mainframe of Princeton, but it wasn't something you could get on a personal computer back in those days. And so people had issues with the language because it was ahead of the technology that was easily accessible. Well, nowadays that's no problem. You can run APL on any computer. So a lot of the tools that I started developing then, I'm using now. So to give you an example, I was doing a session once, and we had this alternate MIDI controller that was really glitchy, and I figured out what was causing the glitches and what the process was that we needed in order to fix these glitches. And it wasn't some simple filter, it was a little bit more complicated than that. And once I figured it out, it's like, okay, I added that plug-in onto my MIDI sequencer that I had created. I never had to shut the software down. I just added the plug-in. We continued the session, we finished the session. You know, that's the kind of thing that even today, with most of the tools people are using, they can't do stuff like that. because the tooling of the technology is considered a whole separate process. Integrating that into the creativity of making music is still kind of on the edge, I think.
How much do you tinker with this stuff now still?
I go through different phases. So like right now, I'm not doing anything with it because I'm on the road and I'm also doing some recordings. But as soon as I get back home tomorrow, I'm going to be right back into it.
It's hard to get away from that stuff, right?
And I also want to introduce you to Jimmy Allington. We worked together back in the day. He's a very talented drummer, and he does audio engineering at Princeton, so he's still there. And we used to play in a band together, and we have a lot of history together. He's someone you should definitely talk to.
Outstanding. So Jimmy, what do you do audio engineering at Princeton? You teach courses on this?
I was with the music department for 7 years, and then I took on a larger role throughout the university as the audio engineer. So now I'm basically in the main hall, which is Princeton Auditorium in Alexander Hall, and I do the sound and recording for that. Plus any other venues on campus. Usually I'm either asked to decide what goes in there, or I give some type of consultation based upon what's in there and what shouldn't be in there. Stan and I go way back, and some of the things he was talking about as far as his computing skills, I witnessed and it was actually amazing. Now the thing about Princeton is it really is the home of electronic music, because people like Paul Lansky, all those people who originally started that whole electronic music where you had to plug in cards to actually get a sound. That's where it actually came up in around the 60s or so, late 60s. So I've been a part of that growth, that exponential growth to what we have out here, which is the things you see at AES, where people are now, just tapping on the screen to get, a plug-in, et cetera, to come up. It wasn't like that at all, Actually, even when I started at Princeton, which was '96, so it was pretty straightforward analog at that point, and pretty much then progressed to what we have today.
So it's pretty much straight analog in '96. Is that what you just said?
Pretty much.
So it's '96. So 20 years. Is my math totally off on that? Almost 30 years. 20 years. Where are we? Something like that. That's not a very long time.
No, it's not a long time. But the thing about the mathematics was always there for digital audio since the late 1800s. The issue was there was no way of calculating that at that massive amount until we got to the point where our computers and everything was able to actually do the math. So it took that time. The funniest thing about any discoveries that we think we might have just made, et cetera, is that the groundwork for it has been there for a long time. The question is, you just don't have the hardware to make it real yet. And as we get further and further along in that, you'll start to see even more amazing things happening than what you even see in here today.
Now, just to sort of revisit the years, so we had the analog electronic music studio, and but going back as far as 78, that's when I started using the digital computer system, and that was already there before I got there, so it goes back.
So I wanted to ask you, though, to get away from all the technology and stuff, how often you get to pick up the drumsticks and play?
I pick up a lot of instruments now. I do a lot of composing, keyboards, guitar. Nowhere near like this guy, but anyway, mostly writing things as, basically. Drums I do as much as I can, but not as often as I would like. So I tend to play more on the keyboards, etc., and do a lot more of composing than anything else.
Is there a jam session between you guys coming up on the horizon again soon?
We just ran into each other. I didn't know you were going to be here, but it's a great idea. We got to play again soon.
When he comes back off his tour, maybe.
I want to thank you guys very much. This was super cool. Yes, Heather.
I just want want to say one last thing. I want to do a special shout out to you, Larry, because we first met up in Forest Hills when you were interviewing the Tom Petty crew. And I want to thank you for preserving that really special moment. And we'll all have our moment of sadness, but happiness that you were able to record that. And thank you, Larry, for all you do. And
Thank you. It's very sweet.